Well, thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. It's interesting that our theme is water today because we have a water problem here in California. I think everybody knows that, everybody understands that. And the question is, why do we have a water problem here in California? A lot of answers to that, but I'm going to today focus on the current drought and more talk about drought in California. And then finally, what are we doing about it as a population, and what should we be doing about the fact that we seem to have more people all the time and less water for them to use. Now, I've personally done a lot of research in this area. I've read many scientific studies, and they're really too numerous to mention or to cite in this speech. And in 7 minutes, I can't even begin to touch upon all the details that I would like to. So we're just going to focus on the drought in California, and water. Now, if we look at climate change, that's a separate subject, of course, of which drought is a small microcosm of that subject. But over the last 125 years or so, scientists have determined that the 10 warmest years in the last 125 years globally occurred in the last 10 since the turn of the century, since the year 2000, 1998 being very close. So as time has gone on from the late 1800s, the Earth has gradually warmed, and it's kind of like boiling that frog. You know, you put them in cold water, and you don't really notice that you're fried until it's hot. And that's what's happening really in California, and people's reaction to drought as it becomes more extreme. Now, climate change can have a lot of effects, and the only effect I'm going to talk about today is, again, a small aspect of one of the changes that has not only been demonstrated, but scientifically expected from climate change and a warming planet, and that is more extremes of the weather, either more tornadoes. Last year we already had any tornadoes. 4 years ago we had 800 inches of snow in the Sierra. This year we had trouble breaking 100 in the highest spots. So these are extremes, and we're seeing more and more of these extremes. For example, if you go to Boston and ask people what they think about global warming, they're probably going to tell you you've been smoking something that grows in California. And because Boston had the snowiest year on record this year. And eastern New England had blizzard after blizzard after blizzard that literally paralyzed the East Coast. I grew up back there, and I follow the weather in that area, and I've never seen anything like this. So this is one of those extremes, but it was a cold extreme. In fact, it was so cold in Boston in February and some of the areas around New York, northern New England, southern New England. This was the coldest month on record in the last 125 years, beating out the previous milestone, which was February 1934, which is one of those months that was so cold and so snowy, nobody ever thought that record would be broken. But in New England and Boston, it was colder than that this year. It was snowier than that this year. So if you go up to Joe Blow in Boston and in a beer hall, he's not going to believe that global warming is happening. However, that was Boston, that was New England. It was just this little bitty part of the planet up here that was so much below normal in January and February. The whole rest of the world was above normal. And as a result, January and February of this year, across the globe, it was the warmest January and February ever since records began. Tell the people in Boston that, they don't believe it, but you believe it out here because it's been certainly our warmest year. So extremes can happen and happen everywhere, and one of our extremes is we're caught up in what has become a 4-year drought. Now, normally we get about 16 inches of rain a year in the Monterey Salinas area, not counting mountain areas. And that's been slowly decreasing over the past decades, but still it's around 16 inches a year if you don't add in the last 4 years. You add in the last 4 years, and it brings it down to about 15 inches a year. Now, it was so bad in the year 2013 that the January to December year itself, there were only a little over 3 inches of rain in my station in Marina, where normally I get 16. So that is an incredible difference. And in 2014, we bounced back, sort of. We bounced back because we had more or less normal rainfall starting in February last year, and then December was one of the wettest on record, and we ended up with 18 inches of rain, which was above normal. But we don't measure rainfall in calendar years in California. We measure from July to June because the rainy season is in the middle of the winter. And so if you take the last 4 rainy seasons, from July through June, we've had an average of about 10 inches of rain, or less than 2/3 of normal in the state. And that's what we're struggling with today. Is that bad? Well, you know, back in the late 80s, from 1986 to 92, we had a 6-year drought. So we dealt with that. 1975-76, some of the older folks in the audience may remember a very severe drought. Only was 2 years, but they had water rationing in Monterey, 50 gallons a person, a day per person. If you went over that, then they cut your water off. And unfortunately, the next year was a rainy year, and it ended, and people's memories are kind of short, and they didn't worry about it anymore, but they should have, because in the history of California, we know there have been a lot longer droughts. There was one article here that I found, Mega Droughts in North America. It's out of the Journal of Quaternary Science in 2009, talks about these historical droughts. And about 1,000 years ago, there were really some long droughts. One drought started in the year 832 and didn't end until 1074. That was a 242-year drought. That was followed by 48 years of what we would consider normal precipitation. And then there was another drought that lasted from 1122 to 1299. That's 177 years. Well, we didn't have 40 million people here then, and so it's a footnote of history. But the question is could that happen again? And the answer is, yes, it could. Will it happen this time? And the answer is, I have no idea. If I knew, I'd be a rich man. But it could happen again. So what are we as a population doing about all of this? Well, we hear Governor Brown get up and talk about cutting back 25%, but that only goes so far. If the reservoir is dry and there's no water in the reservoir, 25% of zero is still zero. So that's only going to save you so much. We do use gray water to water golf courses and things like that, so that's good. That's a good use of water. But I hear these things, particularly in the Monterey Peninsula, well, we're going to wait till it rains and take the water out of the Carmel River or wherever and put it into the ground in the Seaside Aquifer. Well, it's fine if it rains. If it doesn't rain, there's no water to put in the Seaside Aquifer, which keeps going down every year. So as far as final solutions to this, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It was mentioned earlier about desalinization. Don talked about that. Finally, after 40 years of blowing smoke about it, building a desalinization plant here in the peninsula area. But I think what we really need is a massive water redistribution architecture. If we can move oil all over the country, we ought to be able to move water all over the country from where it's plentiful to where it's not, and that costs billions of dollars. But if we don't do it, we may be moving to a more water-friendly place. Mr. Postman.